Hello, everyone. Welcome to this lecture of computer system security. We are going to continue our discussions about cyber attacks, and now we are in the stage that we want to talk about the payloads. If you remember in the last 3 videos, we reviewed the most important cyber attacks and malwares in computer system. We talked about viruses and worms, and also we talked about advanced persistent threat and APT attacks accordingly. And also we talked about Trojan horses. Now we are going to talk about the next step after a malware, whatever the type of malware is being activated or is being triggered. So basically we are talking about what would happen once a malware is active on a victim computer or on a compromised computer. This is basically what we call it the payload. The payload is the action or the malicious activity that the malware is supposed to do. In early malwares that they were developed and kind of propagated over the computer systems, they used to have non-functional payloads. Basically, they don't have anything as a payload. They just want to propagate through as many as more systems that they can, and they just wanted to show that, okay, we could reach your computer, we could infect your computer. But of course, this is not the case for modern malwares. In recent malwares, we have a wide variety of actions or payloads that malwares carry, and then they execute or they perform the payload activity in our computer in order to compromise at least one of those security pillars. If you remember, we mentioned three major security pillars in our computers. We talked about integrity as one of them, and then confidentiality and availability. Of course, we had two more kind of pillars that later were added to these, but these three are somehow the major target or goal of most of malwares when the payload kind of gets started or get executed. Malwares can do data destruction, which means that when the payload part starts, they try to, for example, delete some files, or they try to erase the memory. So this is basically what we call it data destruction. And of course, what pillar is being affected here is the integrity. We are losing the information, we are losing the data. Some other payloads in some other malwares, they're trying to do information theft. They try to steal information from our computer. And of course, what is being compromised here is our confidentiality. Later in the rest of this lecture, I'll be showing you different kind of real world or examples of payloads of malwares that they are targeting each of these security pillars, and specifically each of these types that I'm mentioning here. Some other payloads in malwares can start some ransomware activities. It means that they, for example, they keep some of your file or some of your applications or some of your data in some quarantine situation, and you will not have access to them anymore. And they ask you to pay some money in order to get them released. Of course, the pillars which are being affected, which are being compromised here, are both confidentiality and availability. We also have these important type of payloads that I will be talking about. It is related to something that we call it bot or botnet. If you remember, we counted 5 different important malwares, and I told you that the number 5, which is bot, I'm going to talk about it in the payload part. Yeah, but the payload says, this type says the payload tries to facilitate for other types of attacks, which can later alter any of the security pillars, any of these 3, or even maybe authentication or accountability might be compromised by facilitating other attacks. And finally, some malwares payload when get started, they can do some physical, they can implement or apply some physical damage to our computer system, which again, if we want to translate it into the pillars of security, they are going to be affecting the integrity and availability of our computer. We have some types of malwares. I'll be talking about them. I'll give you one example that they uh, apply some physical damage. It means that you need to do some physical treatment, some physical replacement in order to get your computer back. Okay, before talking about real examples, real world examples of payloads in multiple malwares that I've just selected for you, I'm going to also talk about another important part in most of malwares. What it is logic bomb. What is a logic bomb? Remember, we talked about the phases of malwares, which was the same thing. If you remember, if we mentioned this phase for both viruses and and also for worms. We counted a series of cycles like this. First step or first phase is that our malware is dormant. That I said this might be optional for some malwares. We don't have the dormant phase, and then we go to the triggered phase, and then the malware starts propagating, tries to infect more and more computers, and finally the malware gets executed. The malware starts applying the malicious or implementing the malicious activity. Okay, a transition from the propagation, which is this phase 3, to the execution, which is phase 4, it doesn't happen just as a normal sequence. Most of time, when we are in the propagation, there is something which is called the logic bomb, which is basically a piece of code embedded in our malware, that invokes the payload when a certain condition is met. When a certain condition or a set of conditions are met, the logic bomb starts or initiates the transition from the propagation phase to the execution phase. It means that transition from propagation to execution is done by the decision which is made by logic bomb. So this is a definition of a logic bomb: a code embedded in our malware that invokes the payload. Payload is actually responsible to the execution or implementation of the malware. So when we say transition from propagation to execution, it means that the payload gets started, payload gets executed, and the malicious activity, whatever it is being done on the victim or compromised computer or system. So, but this is the duty of some piece of code that we call it logic, and it makes sense because, of course, you don't wanna if you are a hacker, you don't wanna get your malicious code run as soon as it propagates to one or more computer. No, of course you wanna maximize the propagation, and upon some circumstance you wanna get moved to the execution phase so that you can start the malicious activity. So this is called the logic bomb. And here are, for example, some examples how a logic bomb works. For example, a logic bomb seeks presence of or absence of a certain file on the computer system. For example, once a certain file is created or is being deleted on that computer, the logic bomb explodes and the malware starts the malicious activity. Or upon reaching a particular day in a week, or upon reaching a particular date. For example, we have here is the example in front of you. We have the Chernobyl virus, which the logic bomb in this virus was set to April 26 of 1999. The logic bomb can explode upon reaching a particular version or a particular configuration on some software. So it means that there is no timing delay or timing between the propagation and execution, but in this case, the logic bomb is propagating. The malware is propagating over. I'm talking about this case. The malware is propagating to different computers. For example, here is one infected one, and these are the other computer systems which are being infected by the malware. And the malware, whenever it reaches a new system, it just checks if, for example, this specific version of software or operating system is installed here or not. It's not installed here, so okay, it just continues propagation. It's not installed here, just continuous propagation. Yeah, that specific operating system or that specific application is installed here, so it immediately jumps to the execution phase and starts the payload. So there is no propagation here. Here we just see the malware can get started, or the payload can get started upon observing a specific configuration or software version or whatever. Or once the user runs a particular application. These are all conditions that might be considered as a requirement or as a situation or circumstance that once are observed, the logic bomb explodes and calls the payload, and malware gets into the execution phase. Okay, I'm going to give you some examples of malwares here, or some examples, and now I'm just focusing on the logic bomb. For example, in the Chernobyl virus, the logic bomb was a certain date. It was April 26, 1999, which was the 13th anniversary of that Chernobyl nuclear reactor disaster happened in Ukraine. We have classworm. At which the logic bomb used to explode at the 13th of some months, not all months of the year, but several months of the year, several calendar months. On the 13th of those months, the logic bomb explode and called the execution. And we have also another example, Stuxnet worm, at which the logic bomb was observing a certain device. Even the hardware now is a part of the logic bomb, plus certain version of OS on it in a certain geographical area. So this specific worm, Stuxnet, was set to explode on Siemens PLC controllers. These are some hardware devices with some specific version of OS on them in a certain geographical area. And you know that they combined multiple things, of course, in order to attack a specific organization. Yeah, I'm going to give you some real examples of the payloads to see, of course, to see examples. Of course, what we mentioned here are the list of activities or options that the payload may implement. But now we want to see the real examples, and after that we go into detail and we classify all things that that payloads may do. The first example that I'm going to give you is a Chernobyl virus. I just talked about it. Talked about this logic bomb. It's being activated, or it's being exploded on a certain date. This was a virus which was written for executable files in operating systems of Windows 95 and 98. And after being triggered, the virus starts overwriting the first megabyte of the hard drive. This is very important. You remember we talked about master boot record. Of course, the first 1 megabyte of your hard drive is your master boot record, and it's very important portion of your hard drive. it contains your master boot record. And once overwriting on that, there is no way for that computer to be booted again. It means that if you reboot your computer, there is no reboot, and you need to format your whole disk again and install another operating system, and probably you lose all of the information that you have on your disk. So it imposed a massive corruption on the entire file system. And of course, what is being affected here, what is being altered here in terms of security pillars, both integrity and availability are being affected here. There are some also, so these are data destruction. These are examples of data destruction. But there are also another set of attempts into this virus that tries to rewrite the BIOS code. BIOS code, you remember we talked about, when I talked about computer systems, I talked about main memory. And I said that in main memory, we have two types of memories. One portion is called ROM, read-only memory, and the other portion is RAM or RWM, which is read-write memory. This portion keeps the instruction and data that every time that CPU gets restarted, refers to here for fetching or reading instruction, because this part, it doesn't keep the information after boot or after restart. But this part keeps the information so that it is non-volatile, and once the system gets reboot, the CPU refers here to fetch the first instructions, the loader, if you remember, we talked about it. So the loader code is here. That's a very important code. Of course, it's a very simple code. It's not very complicated, but it's very important code. If someone erases or removes the information here, the system cannot boot anymore. And the Chernobyl virus, one of the other kind of payloads that it had, it also tried to rewrite the BIOS or clear the BIOS. And of course, if successful, what the infected computer could only do is to just reprogram or replace the BIOS chip, because this is a separate memory chip on your main board or your motherboard of your computer. And if this chip is being infected, it is being compromised, you don't have any option but removing this chip, giving it to someone for reprogramming or replacing with a new chip. This is something that we call it physical damage, which is of course very severe type of attack in this virus. We also have this class worm, which is first seen in October 2001, and it was a infection for Windows 95 all the way to different versions of Windows, including Windows 95 to Windows XP. And what it used to do, it used to spread email copies in order to copy itself or propagate to the persons from your address book. And it can stop antivirus program or software, or even suspend them for some moments. And what it used to do in terms of payload, this is a payload. On the trigger date, it caused a file on the hard drive to become empty. It means that it opens your file and clears the file, and that's it. So you see your file, but the file doesn't have any content. And if you have written programs in C or any other programming language, you know that it's going to be very easy. If there is a file here with the name, let's say, for example, 123.txt, let's say, with some information in that, you just need to open that file. Okay, I'm sorry. You just need to open that file with a specific switch. When you open that when you open a new file with this name, you open a new file with the same exact name, the old file and all of its content are going to be automatically erased. So it's very easy to keep the name of the file and clear the content. Basically, you define a new file with the same name, 123.txt, And in the file system, when you search for a file like this, the file system points to this one, and it loses the pointer to this file so that you cannot find the content of your original 123.txt. And this is the payload of this worm. Another example is the PC Cyber Trojan observed in 1989, and this is a ransomware. It has some ransomware payload in it. It means that it encrypts the user data and demands for payment. Some other more advanced version of that were observed in 2006, and they used to encrypt the data with public key cryptography with the key size which is being increased. In the next lecture, we'll be talking about cryptography, and you see that one important feature in the cryptography is the key. That is very important. If I'm gonna decrypt the encrypted information, if I'm gonna open them, I need the key. And the bigger the key in terms of bits, the more time I would need to break into the encrypted information. Sometimes, for example, if it's 128 bits in some existing encryption, they say that the time you need is in the order of 2 to the power of 128, which is somehow impossible. So the length of the key is very important. And in this specific ransomware Trojan, they used to increase the size of the key, which makes it very destructive. Okay. Now, based on the introduction I gave you and also some real examples, I'm going to list the payloads that the most known payloads that we see in malwares in computer system. The first payload that I'm going to talk about is called bots and botnets. I'm going to clarify something here. If you remember, I also listed previously bots as the malwares. That's true, because when I talk about them, you'll see that the bots is not easy to say bots are malware or are payloads. It's something, there's something in between. We can see bots as only as payloads. That's why I put them here. That's why I brought them here. Also, you can see them as a whole complete malware, and you can, for example, classify them with, for example, with Trojan horse or with viruses or worms. I'm going to talk about them, and you'll see that it depends on the details of the bot itself that we should put it, and we should consider it as a whole malware, or we should consider it as a payload of a malware. A bot, this is a definition. A bot tampers the computational and network resources of an infected system for being used by the attacker. Basically, bots are developed to launch or manage more difficult attacks. That's why if we make this definition, if we consider this definition as a main or as the only way that bots work, we should consider bots as a some type of payload, because they're not a whole malware. But later I'll explain that sometimes they do something more than this. So this is the definition that we see for bot. And like I said, this is a definition of bot. We also have another term which is called botnet. And botnet is a collection of bots planted on a group of computers belonging to unsuspecting third parties. It means that you have multiple computers. You have multiple computers. You plant a bot on each of them, and of course the bot can propagate, can spread itself, but you have now an army of computers which are being infected. So one important feature about botnet is that you have an army of computers with distinct IP addresses. It means that if they try to do something, it is not easy to detect them, because they're launching something, they're executing something from different IP addresses. It's not It's not just this easy to say that, okay, let's ban some IP addresses. No, because they might be from different addresses all over the world. And another very important feature of botnet is that they're capable of acting in a coordinated manner. It means that bots, if you look at this uh, figure that I have here, it means that bots can connect to a server. We will be talking about details of this server. Bots can connect to a server, and the server can coordinate the bots in order to do something uh, alone, or in order to do something uh, as a group of bots, in a group of bots. So they can be doing something together, all together, or they can each one they can take care of a portion of an attack. So this is very important. Okay, let's now talk about the payloads or the actions that we may see in bots and botnets. Of course, the major or the main payload that we define for bots, that if we just look at this one, they can be only considered as a payload, is that uh, mm, they they spread a new malware. They mm, they make the system ready, or they prepare the attacker for launching a more sophisticated or more complicated attack. This is the basic payload that we classically see or classically consider for bots. But there are other payloads that we can see in some types of bots. They can do distributed denial of service attack. We'll be talking about denial of service attack in the next video. But what it is, it just attacks your availability. It puts some of the services, it shuts down some of the services so that the user can never, can no longer receive those services. Bots can do spamming, because you have an army of infected computers with different IPs. They can do spamming for you. They can be used to do spamming. They can do sniffing. They can do traffic sniffing. They can listen to the traffic of different computers, and they can give you something. They can do key logging. They capture keystroke or keys hit by the user. They can do fake clicks on ads. You know that there are some, for example, advertisement-based website that they say, if you come here and subscribe, we pay you based on the number of your clicks. We just count the number of your clicks. Okay, some people come, and some attacker comes and they define, for example, thousands of bots, and they basically make a botnet, and the botnet, all that army is now under the control of that person. They go to that server and just click on the advertisement in order to increase or easily increase the number of clicks made on the advertisement. And this is way that they kind of collect money. And also they can, again, because you have bots that they are spread over the internet with different IP addresses, they can be used to manipulate online polls and online games. Okay, we talked about bots and botnets, and the main important thing that we see here is botnets. When we are talking about botnet, there is a server which is supposed to coordinate the army of bots. Okay, let's now talk about this server to see how it may infect the botnet. And this server is actually is technically the main difference between bots and worms. Because you may argue that, you may say that, okay, worms also get a spread on their own. This is true. Worm also get a spread on their own. Bots also get a spread on their own. This is true. But in worms, we don't have any central commander. We don't have any command control facility in order to make an army. They just go, every copy of the worm goes on its own, and they never talk to each other. There is no coordination or management about them. But in bots, we have a control and a command and control facility, which is basically a server that connects to the bots of the botnet and control them and give them some instructions. In some cases, in some botnets, that CNC server or control and command center, they just initially performs the management or coordination, and then after some while it lets the bots to go, each one goes by its own. But in most of them, it's not the case. That server keeps working, keeps coordinating the bots and the botnet in order to, of course, if you have an army, it would be very better to have a general. That general can coordinate and can tell them what to do. And of course, for communicating between the bots of a botnet and that server, we need some type of internet communication, but it doesn't mean that the bots and bot server or the CNC server, they need to be connected all the time. No, they just need that connection every, let's say, hours or minutes. And then if if there is no more connection, they can still stand working. And once again the network connection is established, they can send and receive new command or new instructions. Okay, because of having this CNC server or CNC facility, the bot's payload may change over time. It was initially supposed to do something, just for example, steal some information, but now because something is not right or some patches are released by some antivirus program, the CNC server asks the bots of the botnet to just keep quiet for a while. Just don't do anything, so that the botnet, the bot server sends an update for them. So that's why I say the payload of a bots of a botnet may change over time. Here are some examples of the commands that CNC server may send to the bots of a botnet. Execute, which is actually triggering the pilot. Execute the routines or the payloads which is already implemented in the bot code. Whatever you have with you as a malicious activity, just run that. Just do that, and it is the time to harm that computer that you have infected it. The second command or another type of command might be this: download some file. The CNC server may ask the bots of the botnet to go and download some file from some location, which might be some type of update for the bot. So the bot is getting updates, so its payload might be updated as well. And then the bot server or the CNC server may send information to gather information, to collect information which is being gathered by the bots of the botnet. So every bot collects some information and just waits until receive a command from the server. And once it receives the command from the server, it sends the collected information to the CNC server. Okay, you see that they're very complicated, and it's not easy to say that either it's not very clear to put them as a whole malware or just see them as a payload. Of course, if they're this complicated, they can get updated. They do something, they collect information and send. They might be considered as a whole, as a separate malware. But if you have some simple bots that they just prepare the system for running a different or a separate attack, in that case, we just see them as a malware. Okay, now let's talk more about the CNC facility or CNC server control and command, or command and control, doesn't matter how you put them. The traditional CNC facility or server is going to be implemented through chat servers. IRC, Internet Relay Chat, is a network that you can chat with that. And of course, bots used to join to that specific server over some specific channel, and the information or the text which is transferred between the server and the bot is used to consider as a commands, and those the bots see them as commands and try to interpret them and try to run them, whatever the command is. In more recent botnets, other than IRC network, there might be some communication, some covert communication over the more usual internet protocols, such as HTTP or whatever. The server is somewhere, the CRC server is somewhere, and the bots are getting connected to that using, for example, HTTP or using IRC, and the commands or the text which is being transferred from the CNC server and the bots see them as the commands, and then they perform what they're supposed to do. Okay, but there is one some type of problem with both of these implementations, either IRC or communications over more familiar internet protocols like HTTP. The problem is that in that case, if I'm a security engineer, if I'm a defender, what I just need to do is to detect or find the CNC server and just shut down this server. In that case, there wouldn't be any more communication between the server and the bots, and bots, those which are not in the payload part, they may just stay and do nothing. So this is what we call it a single point of failure. A single point of failure, it means that a simple mechanism that can be used to deal with bots, to kind of combat bots, is to find the CNC server and just shut it down or make it out of access. Considering these modern or more recent versions of bots and botnets, they use distributed control mechanism. It means that the CNC server is not a single server with a specific IP address or with a specific address that someone can just come and shut it down. No, there are peer-to-peer protocols, and it means that every computer in the network can play the role of CNC. Every computer which is infected with a bot later can turn into a CNC server, and other bots can get connected to that. So of course, this makes it way more difficult to be detected. And this way we can, bot developers, they can kind of avoid having that single point of failure. So this is, like I said, one way that use of peer-to-peer network. And in that case, you need to have, you need to somehow name the bot servers and register them. So there are some naming generation algorithms in order to find the names or register some domains for the CNC server. Once this CNC is being detected by the security defender, another bot infected system turns into a CNC server. And of course, when we say turns, there should be some domain register somewhere. So there should be some name for that. At that name, how that name should be determined. There are some name generation, because you don't want to make it very easy. For example, this is server number 1, this is server number 2, this is server number 3. Again, that's going to be very easy. So they changed the naming in a heuristic way, so that the defender cannot easily predict the next server and shut it down easy. Or they use more advanced IP address allocation mechanisms in order to repeatedly change the IP address of the CRC server. Again, these two are example mechanisms that modern bots and botnets use, just in order to avoid having single point of failure, which means that it's going to be more difficult for detecting or preventing such type of bot and botnets. Okay, the second payload that we are going to talk about is information theft. I'm going to talk about two different things that they do information theft. that's why I named this slide like this. Payload number 2 is information theft, but I have another slide that also talks about information theft. So I called that one information theft too. Information theft, it means it can be understood from the name. It means that once the payload gets activated, the infected, the malware tries to collect some information from the compromised system and tries to send it to the attacker. And that information is being used by the attacker directly or indirectly. One example of payloads that they do information stealing is keylogger. Keylogger, what it is basically malware that comes onto your computer. It might be any type of malware. It might be a Trojan. It might be a worm or virus, whatever. We are not talking about the type of malware. Any malware can do information theft. So that virus or Trojan or worm, which has been infected your computer, it just looks at the information that or the data that you are pressing once you want to try to log in into some important website. And the reason is basically when you want to get log in into for example, into your bank account, the username and password, you just don't send them as a text. They're being encrypted. And you of course communicate with encrypted protocols like HTTPS or POP3S. And the information, user and password, they are not plain text. It's not like if my username is, for example, my last name, my username doesn't fly like this over the network. So if someone just listens to the data over the network, they cannot find username and password. So what they do, they develop a malware and then they send the malware to the host, to the computer. And once that malware is has reached the computer and infect that computer, it can listen to the key kind of hit by the user, and it logs the key, it captures the keystroke, and send them back to the attacker. That's why it is in fact the keylogger. They try to somehow bypass this encryption, because what I'm pressing on my keyboard, it is unencrypted before that data is injected into the network. I mean, the data in my own computer is unencrypted. Once it's going to be traveled over or is going to be injected into the network, into the IP cloud, sometimes they call it IP cloud or the network, it's being encrypted right here. So if the malware is inside my computer, it can read the data before getting the data encrypted, and that's what it wants. So this is one, like I said, one type of payload that try to steal information, and that's why you may have seen this type of keyboards, which are called graphical keyboards. In the graphical keyboards, you don't enter the information using your real keyboard of your computer. Some keyboard may be shown to you, which is graphical, and you just hit different keys in order to, for example, enter your username and then your password. And if you have noticed, every time they change the layout of these. So one is here, 2 years here. Next time you go to this page, here is, for example, A, here is 1, and something like this. Because they want to also make sure that you are safe against other type of attack, for example, clickjacking or something similar to that. Yeah, this is a defense mechanism against keyloggers. And of course, the next step, attackers or hackers, they don't kind of stay still. They have also improved the attacks, and they came up with other kind of more complicated attacks, which again, they're in their payload, what they do is information theft. Spyware is a set of program or one program which tries to collect information from the compromised computer. Yeah, but but what they do is they kind of listen to the activities which are being done on the compromised computer way wider than the keylogger. The keylogger that we just talked about it here, what they look at is just the key strike. They just look at the keys you are pressing in your computer, in your keyboard. They don't look at any other thing. Spywares are somehow a more advanced version of keyloggers. They look at many different things. They look at, for example, they can look at uh, they might be categorized in, they may fall in this category, which are called system monitor, spywares that monitor the whole system, the whole computer. They record almost anything, including the keys that you are pressing, mouse actions that you are doing, history of your the web pages that you're viewing, or any other thing. We have spywares that they do that they just track your internet activities. They collect information about your internet activity, for example, cookies, browsing history, and the history of your downloads and stuff like this. And they collect this information, they send it to the attacker for further use. And also we have spywares that they just track your computer or your browser in order to collect some information and send you a relevant kind of ads or advert, which is somehow the least dangerous type of spyware. But basically, what I'm trying to make it clear here is that spywares are the next version or advanced version of keyloggers. And of course, what they look at is a wider range of information, just not looking at the keyboard or keystroke. They look at the keyboard, mouse movement, and processes which are being running on your computer, and any other thing. But what they do is, again, this thing. Their payload is information theft. What they do is that they just steal information from your computer and send it somewhere for further processing. Okay. Another type of information theft payload that I kind of named it as number 3 payload that we are talking about is phishing attack or phishing. What it is gathering some sensitive information. Of course, it's from this sense, it's similar to the previous example, previous slide we talked, including keyloggers and spywares, because this one also gathers information from the victim's computer, but it does this by mimicking some legit website. What it means, you are being deceived by, for example, receiving some spam email, and that spam email, it has some links in it. It redirects you to some sites that you normally go and you normally visit, for example, your bank account website, and that's a legit website to you. And they try to make it graphically very similar to that legit or original website. So once you click on that URL, you think that they're the same. You go there, and of course, sometimes they put you in a kind of urgent situation. They say that you need to take some urgent action in order to, for example, protect your bank account or something. You go there, and after you entered your credential, username, and password, they collect that, and sometimes they even redirect you to the main site in order to for you to not to realize that it was a phishing attack. Okay, what is being done here is, again, information theft. So the payload that we see here is information theft. But of course, it's slightly different with the previous one. In the previous one, there is no need to fool the person, the victim. We just collect the information. The keylogger or spyware, they just collect the information and they don't need to make any trust. But here, the basic thing is trust. There should be some fake trust. User relies on something which is basically false. He or she shouldn't. A more advanced version of the phishing attack that their payload do the information theft. They try to exploit. They try to kind of make it even more effective by exploiting some social engineering. For example, another version which is called spear phishing. They do a research on the recipient. They do a research on the recipient. They try to find someone in his group, someone is, for example, in his let's say working environment or from his family, sometimes based on the social media, and then they send a crafted email that specifically works for that person. I personally received a few emails like this from the place I used to work in my previous institution. I remember I received an email from him saying something which was very relevant, and after the first time I didn't recognize. After I continued communicating with him, he said, "Can you please give me some amount of money?" And that was the time that I kind of got suspicious. I looked at the email address and I realized that, oh, they generated an email address with the exact same name and family under a unknown domain. So I didn't pay attention at first to the domain of that email address. I just looked at the name and family name. But yeah, I mean, it was, of course, a crafted phishing email. It was a spear phishing. It wasn't a normal phishing because it was a targeted email based on my relation to my chair relation. And of course, when it came to the money, I texted him. I said, "That is this you emailing me?" And he said, "No, it's not me." Anyway. Okay, the next type of payload that I'm going to talk about is payloads that they like to stay, they prefer to stay hidden. Okay, you may wonder how it's possible if the malware is in the execution phase and is supposed to do the malicious activities, how staying hidden might be malicious. I'm going to tell you, and you'll see that it is very kind of, it makes sense, actually. But we have some terminology called backdoor. Backdoor in the programming is something that programmers use in order to legitimately open some shortcut for themselves for debugging. For example, you want to debug a program, and that program, when you start it, at first it asks you enter, for example, a matrix. You may have written a program like this. For example, you write a program to multiply two matrices 100 by 100. And you want to debug this program. When you run it, it says enter all elements of this, for example, the matrix, or it tries to read a file to list, to fill up these matrices. So you don't want to, for example, at this time, enter this amount of numbers, this amount of entries. You just write a backdoor in your program so that when you run it, it just jumps to the multiplication subroutine, and you go there and you want to check if the multiplication is working correctly or not. So this is a backdoor that helps you, give you some type of shortcut in order to debug and test your program easier. They are also sometimes called maintenance hook. Of course, in a small program like the example I gave you, you can remove the backdoor before releasing the final version of the program. It means that once you're sure that the multiplication is correct, is being done accurately, you remove the backdoor, and every time that you run the program, or anyone who runs the program, he or she needs to enter the information of the matrices, or the information is being read from a file, so that after that the multiplication happens. But in bigger programs, they keep this type of backdoors. For example, in operating system, you want to debug operating system, there should be some backdoors even after releasing the program, so that make the debug and test and even updates easier. So what happens if I'm a hacker and I know some backdoors in, for example, some operating systems? I may use them against the security of that system. So backdoors may be designed, may be used legitimately by the programmers in order to make the debug and test easier, or gain special privileges, or they give a special privileges to the program developer, or the person that is supposed to do the maintenance of that system. For example, you don't want to get all this authentication steps, you just want to jump to the place that there is faulty and then fix it. So you use a backdoor. But like I said, if I'm a hacker and I know some backdoors in a computer, or in a system, I can use that backdoor in order to compromise the system. So the next payload that we are talking about, or like I said, they like to stay hidden. And one example is stealthing backdoor. That it means that, or which is also called trapdoor. It means that in the malwares that they are using this type of payload, they prefer to stay hidden because they have found some backdoor, some legit backdoor in the system, and they just wanna keep gaining from that backdoor. So they don't wanna do anything that make them detectable. Because, for example, there is a program that if you want to get access, you need to log in. And I found a backdoor in this system, and I can bypass this login or authentication process. I use that as a trapdoor or as a stealthing backdoor in order to just bypass this. So, and that's what I need. I don't need to do anything. I just like to stay hidden because I have already reached my goal. I can bypass this authentication process or a step of accessing this resource, whatever it is. So, it's sometimes very difficult to detect them and to patch the backdoors, especially if the backdoor is somewhere in the program, in a program which is not a part of operating system. You have a backdoor in your computer, in your application, which is not operating system. So operating system would have a hard time to fixing that. And you can pause the video here and think about what security pillars might be compromised by if some hidden backdoors are found in a computer system. Okay, I'm assuming that you have thought about it, and of course, all of them might be compromised. It depends on the backdoor. It depends on the backdoor, the type of backdoor, but there are potential to each of them being compromised. Please use this trapdoor as the attendance code for today's class. Trapdoor without that column, trapdoor, all lowercase. And I think we can stop here. This is 60 minutes recording. We can stop here. The last payload that I'm going to talk about is another type of payload that this one also likes to stay hidden. It is called rootkit, but it has multiple slides, and I guess it's going to be more than a few minutes. So I continue from here. in the next recording. And the next recording, we finish the payloads, and also I will be talking about the denial of service attacks. And this is going to be finishing our cyber attacks lecture 2. And also next week, we have the exam as well. Please look at the announcements and email I sent you. You need to study lecture 0, 1, and 2 for the exam. Thank you for making today, and have a good rest of the day.